Another day, another scandal engulfing Downing Street. But this time, it's different. This time, we're watching what could very well be the final unraveling of Keir Starmer's premiership. And frankly, it couldn't happen to a more deserving government. You know, when Labour swept to power just 19 months ago with that massive majority, Starmer stood at that lectern and promised us something different. He promised us integrity. He promised us competence. He promised us an end to the chaos and sleaze that had, admittedly, plagued the final years of Conservative government. We will be different, he said. We will restore trust in politics. Well, how's that working out? Because right now, as I speak to you, the Prime Minister is clinging to office by his fingernails. His Chief of Staff has resigned. His Director of Communications has quit. The leader of Scottish Labour has publicly called for him to step down. Police are searching properties linked to his former US ambassador. And approval ratings? They're lower than Liz Truss. Lower than Liz Truss. Let that sink in for a moment. And all of this centers on one catastrophic decision: appointing Peter Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to the United States, despite knowing about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, let's be absolutely clear about who Jeffrey Epstein was. This wasn't just some dodgy businessman. This wasn't someone caught in a minor financial scandal. Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender. He pleaded guilty in 2008 to soliciting prostitution from a minor. He died in prison in 2019 while awaiting trial on federal charges of trafficking dozens of girls. This was a monster who abused vulnerable young women and girls for decades. And Peter Mandelson was his friend. Not just an acquaintance. His best pal, according to Mandelson's own handwritten note in Epstein's 50th birthday book. His best pal. But it gets worse. So much worse. The latest release of Epstein files by the US Department of Justice, over 3 million pages, has revealed the depth of this relationship. We're not talking about someone who met Epstein once at a party and didn't know what he was up to. We're talking about a relationship that continued after Epstein's conviction. After everyone knew what he was. The documents show that Mandelson received $75,000 in payments from Epstein between 2003 and 2004. $75,000. Mandelson claims he doesn't remember receiving this money. Doesn't remember. How do you not remember $75,000 appearing in your bank account? Then there's Mandelson's partner, now husband, Reinaldo Avila da Silva. Epstein sent him £10,000 to pay for an osteopathy course in 2009, while Mandelson was a cabinet minister. While he was business secretary during the financial crisis, Epstein was literally bankrolling the partner of a senior British government minister. But here's where it moves from merely scandalous to potentially criminal. The files suggest that Mandelson was passing sensitive government information to Epstein during the 2008 financial crisis. Market-sensitive information. The kind of information that could make someone very, very rich if they knew how to use it. We're talking about internal government reports on how the UK planned to raise money after the crash. We're talking about advance notice of a €500 billion EU bailout. We're talking about discussions on bankers' bonus taxes, taxes that Mandelson appears to have told Epstein he would lobby to reduce. Think about what that means. At the height of the worst financial crisis in living memory, when ordinary British families were losing their homes, their jobs, their savings, a senior cabinet minister was allegedly sharing confidential government information with a convicted sex offender who had financial interests in those very markets. The Metropolitan Police are now investigating Mandelson for misconduct in public office. That's an offence that carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Life imprisonment. They've searched his homes in London and Wiltshire. This is serious. This is criminal investigation serious. And Keir Starmer appointed this man as ambassador to the United States. Now, Starmer's defense has evolved in quite an interesting way, hasn't it? Initially, he said he didn't know the full extent of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Then, under questioning in Parliament, he admitted that the vetting process had revealed that Mandelson's friendship with Epstein continued after Epstein's 2008 conviction. He knew, and he appointed him anyway. Then he pivoted to saying that Mandelson had lied repeatedly to him and his team about the extent of the relationship, that Mandelson portrayed Epstein as someone he barely knew, that none of them knew the depth and the darkness of that relationship. But here's the problem with that defense. Everyone knew. This wasn't secret information. Mandelson's friendship with Epstein was public knowledge. It had been reported in the media. There were photographs of them together. Mandelson had been photographed in a bathrobe on Epstein's private Caribbean island. This wasn't some hidden relationship that only came to light through classified intelligence. So, either Starmer's vetting process was catastrophically inadequate, in which case, what does that say about his judgment and the competence of his government? Or he knew, or should have known, the extent of the relationship and appointed Mandelson anyway, in which case, what does that say about his judgment and his moral compass? Neither answer is good. And let's remember, this isn't Mandelson's first rodeo with scandal. He'd already been forced to resign from government twice before. Once in 1998, over failing to disclose a loan. Once in 2001, over allegations of passport application interference. This is a man with form. A man known for courting wealthy and controversial figures. A man nicknamed the Prince of Darkness for his Machiavellian approach to politics. And Starmer thought, yes, this is the man to represent Britain in Washington. This is the man to be our face to the Trump administration. Now, some will say, well, Trump has his own connections to Epstein. And yes, Trump's name appears in some of the files. But Trump isn't facing a political crisis over it because, rightly or wrongly, his supporters factored all of that into their judgment of him years ago. Trump doesn't claim to be the guardian of public integrity. Trump didn't campaign on being different, on restoring trust in politics. Starmer did. That was his entire pitch. And now look where we are. The resignation of Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's chief of staff, was meant to be the circuit breaker. The man who advised Starmer to appoint Mandelson falling on his sword, taking responsibility, allowing the Prime Minister to move forward. But it hasn't worked. Because McSweeney's resignation just raised more questions. If McSweeney was so instrumental in this decision, what does that say about Starmer's leadership? Was he just rubber-stamping his advisor's recommendations without proper scrutiny? Is he not actually in charge? And if McSweeney knew about Mandelson's Epstein connections and recommended him anyway, why? What was his judgment based on? Then Tim Allen, the communications director, resigned the next day. Two of Starmer's most senior aides gone in 48 hours. That's not a government in control. That's a government in crisis. And then came the moment that, I think, will be remembered as the turning point. Anas Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, called a press conference and told Keir Starmer to resign. Now, Sarwar isn't some minor backbencher. He's not a usual suspect critic. He's the leader of Labour in Scotland. He's a man who, just months ago, was standing shoulder to shoulder with Starmer on election platforms, talking about how they were going to win back Scotland together. He described Starmer as a friend. But with Scottish Parliament elections just 3 months away, and Labour languishing in the polls behind the SNP and fighting with Reform UK for second place, Sarwar made the calculation that Starmer was an anchor around his neck, that his only chance of electoral survival was to cut the rope. The distraction needs to end, Sarwar said, and the leadership in Downing Street has to change. Devastating. Absolutely devastating. Because once that first domino falls, once the first senior Labour figure breaks ranks publicly, others will follow. It's always the way. Politics is about momentum, and right now, all the momentum is against Starmer. Within minutes of Sarwar's announcement, cabinet ministers were scrambling to put out statements of support. Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, David Lammy, all of them rushing to social media to back their boss. But that desperation tells its own story. If Starmer's position was secure, they wouldn't need to do that. The very fact that they felt compelled to issue these statements shows how weak he is. And look at what's happening in the polls. His net approval rating is -44. -44. After just 19 months, the lowest of any prime minister in 50 years, according to Ipsos. 50 years. That includes everyone. That includes politicians who presided over economic catastrophes, political turmoil, strikes, you name it. And Starmer is worse. More than half the public 55% think he should resign as Labour leader. Among Labour's own voters from 2024, opinion is split. That's his own voters. The people who put him in office. And they're not sure he should stay. The latest MRP projections show Reform UK winning 381 seats if an election were held now. 381. Labour down to just 85 seats, a loss of 326 seats from the last election. That's not a defeat. That's not even a collapse. That's a political extinction event. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. These are just polls. They'll change. Labour has a massive majority. They're in for 5 years. And yes, technically, constitutionally, that's true. Starmer can't be forced out by the opposition. Only his own party can remove him. But here's the thing about political momentum. Once it turns against you, it's incredibly hard to reverse. And every day this drags on, every new revelation in the Epstein files, every uncomfortable interview, every resignation, it compounds the damage. Think about what's still to come. The Metropolitan Police investigation into Mandelson is ongoing. There could be charges. There could be a trial. And every day of that trial would be another day of headlines about Epstein, about Mandelson, about Starmer's judgment in appointing him. Then there's the vetting documents. Starmer has promised to release the paperwork around Mandelson's appointment to prove that Mandelson lied to his team. But those documents have to be vetted for national security concerns and to avoid prejudicing the police investigation. That could take weeks, months even. And in the meantime, the drip, drip, drip of damaging stories continues. Because here's what people need to understand. The US Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of Epstein-related documents. 3 million pages. Journalists are still going through them. There could be more revelations about Mandelson yet to come. There probably are more revelations yet to come. Every day Starmer stays in office, he's vulnerable to another bombshell, another email, another photograph, another bank transaction, another piece of evidence that Mandelson was even closer to Epstein than we already know. And let's talk about what this has done to Labour's moral authority, because this isn't just about Starmer's personal survival. This is about the credibility of the Labour Party's entire pitch to the British people. Labour won that landslide election by positioning themselves as the adults in the room, the competent managers, the clean hands after years of Conservative scandals. Remember all of that? Boris Johnson's parties during lockdown, Owen Paterson's lobbying, the PPE contracts, the general sense of one rule for them, another for us. Labour said they would be different. They said they would restore integrity to public life, and millions of people believed them. They voted for change. They voted for something better. And what did they get? A government that appointed a man with a documented history of scandal and questionable relationships to the most important diplomatic post in the British government. A government that apparently did inadequate vetting or ignored the results of adequate vetting. A government now mired in exactly the kind of controversy they promised to eliminate. The betrayal voters must feel is palpable, and you can see it in those approval ratings. You can see it in the fact that Labour is polling behind Reform UK. People feel duped. They feel lied to. They feel like they were sold a bill of goods. And here's the really damaging thing. This plays directly into the narrative that all politicians are the same. That it doesn't matter who you vote for. They're all corrupt. They're all incompetent. They're all looking out for themselves. That's a narrative that destroys faith in democratic politics. It drives people toward extremes, toward populists who promise to blow the whole thing up. Reform UK must be absolutely delighted with this. Nigel Farage is probably sending Keir Starmer a thank you card. Because every day this scandal continues, every day Starmer looks weak and embattled. It's another day that voters think, well, maybe we need something radically different. Maybe the traditional parties are broken beyond repair. Now, I've heard some Labour supporters try to defend this by pointing to past Conservative scandals. What about Boris Johnson? What about Liz Truss? What about all the things the Tories did? And look, I'm not here to defend every decision made by previous Conservative governments. There were mistakes. There were scandals. I've been critical of many of them myself. But there's a fundamental difference. The Conservatives didn't campaign in 2024 on a platform of restoring integrity. They were on their way out. They'd lost public trust. That was priced in, as they say, in financial markets. Labour was supposed to be different. That was their whole pitch. That was the reason millions of people who'd voted Conservative for years switched their vote. Because they believed Starmer when he said Labour would govern with integrity and competence. And it's turned out to be hollow, completely hollow. The Mandelson appointment is the kind of decision that's so misjudged, so tone-deaf, that it makes you question everything else. If they got this so catastrophically wrong, what else are they getting wrong? What else aren't we seeing? What other decisions are being made with the same lack of judgment? And let's think about the timing of this. Labour has been in government for 19 months. Just 19 months. They've got years left in their term. But already, they're a dead government walking. Already, they've lost the public's confidence. Already, they're consumed by scandal and internal division rather than governing. Think about what they could have done with that massive majority, with that public goodwill, with that mandate for change. They could have implemented meaningful reforms. They could have tackled the serious structural problems facing this country. They could have left a legacy. Instead, they'll be remembered for this, for the Epstein scandal, for the shortest honeymoon period in modern political history, for snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And personally, I find the whole thing rather sad, actually. Not for Starmer, he made his choices and must live with the consequences, but for what this represents about the state of British politics. We deserve better than this. The British people deserve better than this. We deserve governments that take the responsibility of office seriously, that understand the weight of decisions like appointing ambassadors. That put country before party, principle before convenience. What we have instead is a Prime Minister who is currently -44 in approval ratings, who has lost 2 of his most senior advisors in as many days, who has been publicly called on to resign by a senior member of his own party, whose former ambassador is under criminal investigation, and who is facing the very real possibility of becoming the shortest-serving Labour Prime Minister in history. And you know what the worst part is? Starmer still might limp on for months. He might cling to office through sheer obstinacy. He might calculate that it's better to stay and weather the storm than to step aside. And every day he does that is another day of paralysis, another day of distraction, another day when the government isn't focusing on the real issues facing this country. The economy is struggling. Public services are under strain. People are worried about the cost of living, about immigration, about crime, about their children's futures. And what is the government doing? It's consumed by scandal. It's in crisis management mode. It's fighting for survival rather than fighting for the British people. This is what happens when you prioritize clever political positioning over substance. When you think you can spin your way out of poor decisions. When you believe that because you have a big majority, you're untouchable. Starmer thought he was so smart appointing Mandelson. He thought he was getting a political heavyweight with Washington connections who could handle Trump. He thought he was showing he was willing to use all the talents available to the Labour Party, even controversial ones. He thought he was being pragmatic. What he actually did was hand a loaded gun to his opponents and his critics. He gave them exactly the ammunition they needed to destroy his credibility. He proved that all his talk about integrity and competence was just talk, just words. And now he's paying the price. His government is paying the price. And ultimately, the British people are paying the price, because we're stuck with a zombie government that has lost all authority and purpose. The question now isn't whether Starmer survives. It's how long this agony is prolonged. How many more resignations? How many more damaging revelations? How many more polls showing his support collapsing? Because one thing is certain. The longer this goes on, the worse it gets. Not just for Starmer, not just for Labour, but for all of us who care about having a functional government that can actually govern. Keir Starmer's Epstein problem hasn't just got worse, it's become terminal. And the only question remaining is how long until everyone else realizes it too. The Prime Minister stood at that lectern 19 months ago and promised change. He promised integrity. He promised competence. He promised to be different. Well, he got one thing right. This is definitely different. It's different because we've never seen a government collapse this quickly. We've never seen a Prime Minister with such a massive majority become so weak so fast. We've never seen the wheels come off with such spectacular speed. And you know what? He has no one to blame but himself. Not his advisors, not Peter Mandelson, not the media, not the opposition. Him. He made the decision. He owns it. And now he's living with the consequences. The tragedy is that everyone else has to live with them too. Thank you for listening.